Alright guys, last time, during the last lesson you learned about solving functions using function tables. And today we're going to use those function tables again, but we're going to define what functions really are, and what the rules are, and how to find those rules in the different parts of function tables. The essential question is still, how can I represent a function as a rule or a table? But like I said, during this lesson, you are going to learn what functions are, the different parts of a function, and many more other things that will be asked of you. So let's go ahead and get started and look at some of these things. Okay. The function, a function is defined as a pairing of inputs and outputs where each input goes to one output. Okay, so if we go back to that original screen, where that where our essential question was, you'll notice that there are two different parts to that. There is a function right here, and notice that each of the outputs, the things on this side, there's only one arrow going to each of those outputs. That is a function, right? Now this one is not a function because there are multiple arrows going to that one dot on the right hand side, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but that is what defines a function, right? This is going to be difficult here. I'm going to have to keep going back and forth, it seems. Huh? Or am I able to do that? Give me 1 second, guys. I know I'm not letting me write anymore. But anyway, we'll get to that. A function, again, is a pairing of inputs and outputs where each input only goes to one output. We're going to label these inputs and outputs as X and Y. Okay. Now, when we look at these functions, we have what is said to be my pen is not working right now. I'm sorry, guys. We have what's said to be a domain and a range. Now, the domain of a function are the things that go into it. It's the items that we put into that function and solve it. The range are the things that come out. It's the answers, essentially. So when you practiced last time, when you had that those function tables that you had to do, you put some numbers into that function, you solved it, you replaced that x value with that function, and you solved it. That was the range, those x values, and the y, the things that, the answers essentially, were what came out of it, and that's the range. So again, as we identify the domain and the range of this function, this input and output shows the cost of various amounts of regular unleaded gas. You'll see that they all come from the same pump. When we're going to identify the range, the domain, and the range of that function. Okay. Now, if we think about when we pump gas, the cost depends on how much money or how much gas we put in, right? So the domain in this case, we're going to call it red. The domain is what we're putting in. Okay, we are putting in the input. We're putting those things that into our car. That's how much gas we're putting in. So the domain actually falls in there. So the domain of this function would be 10, 12, 13, and 17. There is not one given thing for this. There's not one given number. Sorry, guys, my kids are annoying right now. And the range then, after we put that gas in, is how much of it actually comes out, right? So the domain is, again, 10, 12, 13, and 17. The range then, in this case, is the output, or 19. Sorry, I should have done a different color. The range is 19.99, 23.99, 25.99, and 33.99. So again, remember, the domain is what goes in, the range is what comes out. Okay. Now again, I remember I said that a function is essentially the inputs and outputs of that thing. So we could have a function. Again, remember, we have these functions look like f of x equals 2x plus 5. Okay, that's an idea of a function, where the inputs would be what we put in, and so that's the domain, and the outputs are essentially the answer after we solve that. In this case, here are what you see here. This is called a mapping. So this is a diagram of the pairing of inputs for a function to the output of a function. Okay. What you will notice here is that the inputs are always labeled x. Okay. So your input is always going to be your x. And this is also known as your domain. And your outputs, or the range, will be identified as your y's. Okay? And remember the initial definition of a function said that an input goes to only one output. Look at this example right here. Notice what is happening. So an input goes to only one output. Okay? So this input only goes to one spot. This input only goes to one spot. This one spot, one spot, one spot. So this red one is identified as a function, right? This other one over here, I'm going to do it red because red is bad. Your input only comes off of one. There's only 1, 2 going to an output, and 3 actually comes off twice. So because there are 2 arrows coming off of this input, this is not a function, right? So if there is 1 arrow coming off of an x or an input, it is a function. If there are 2 arrows or more arrows coming off of one input of a function, it is not a function. Okay. There are also things called the variables. The independent variable is the input variable. You can remember that as independent is the input. So that's one way that I remembered it. And then the dependent variable, if I can get this to go away, is obviously the output, right? Again, the independent variable is the input. The dependent variable is the output. So here is an example of what I am talking about, and this is where we will end for this lesson. We're going to make a table for this function. The domain of the function y equals 2x. So this here, This is the function. This is what we are going to solve. And it tells us the domain of that function is 0, 2, 5, 7, and 8. Now remember, the domain is the things that go in to this function. So those are going to be our x's. It identifies and it tells us what those are automatically. The range then tells us the range will be from what do we have to do to those x's. So to get y, it tells us that we have to multiply 2 times our x. So 2 times that x. And then we'll do that for every single input that's there. So we'll do 2 times 0, 0. 2 times 2, 4. 2 times 5, 10. 2 times 7, 14. 2 times 8, 16. Lastly, it says identify the range of this function. Remember, the range then is the outputs. That is what came out after we did that to our input. So in this case, our range is 0, 4, 10, 14, and 16. If you have any questions on this, guys, always remember to email me or chat or do those things if you need to. Again, make sure that you understand these things. Move on into the practice. Again, ask questions if you need them. I am here for you. I hope this helped a little.